he didn't want to get the rest of us sick, so I said, thank you. That's nice. I don't want to be sick. And Laura Bandit said that she was not able to come. So I'm hoping that Alex makes it for the rest of the meeting. So tonight, Michael, you will be voting.
Okay.
If we have anything to vote on. There's nothing to vote on because it's just a discussion item.
That's all right. So much for my big
But you're a real member now.
All right.
Okay. So let's do the Pledge of Allegiance, and I've asked Michael if he will do it.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment?
Do that, read this, introduce the meeting,
Okay.
and people that are in attendance. Did you say their names? I know you said who wasn't there.
Okay. So bear with me, because Bob called me just a little while ago and asked me to do the meeting, so. I need to say what commission members are here. So we've got Michael Fortune and Ruth Ann Holloway. I'm Kathleen Alder, Vice Chair, and this is Roland Cecil. So thank you all for being here. We need to approve the minutes of the last meeting, which was January 22nd.
I move we approve the meetings of January 22nd, 2020.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Have we gone through them to make sure?
Okay. Any comment on any of them? Did you? I went through them and didn't see anything.
Yeah.
I didn't see anything either.
Okay. So there are no changes to it. Do we need to vote on it? We don't. If it's,
Yes.
We do?
Yes.
Okay.
And one other thing, Kathleen, for the video or the audio, would you mind stating who makes the motion and who makes the second?
I will.
Thank you.
Cecil Roland.
Roland Cecil.
Roland Cecil. I need to remember that because I'm a Roland grandson. Roland Cecil made a motion and Michael Fortune seconded. So there are no comments about the minutes. There are no changes. So all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. It's unanimous. Okay, so we have public comment. We have 3 people on the list. So Laura, you're first on the list.
Oh, you mean on the sign-in?
Well, you signed a public comment, which means that you want to comment.
I'm sorry, I thought I was just signing in that I was here.
Okay. So, did all the rest of you, do we have anyone that wants to make any public comment? Okay. So, we'll close that segment of the meeting. Thank you for being here. There was no one at the last meeting, so we didn't even have any audience members, did we? So, thank you for attending the meeting. There are no public hearings tonight. There is no legislative, no action items, but we do have a discussion item. And the discussion item is it states that the Planning Commission will review the street cross-section options and partial streets.
Should we consider this action item note?
Should I read the section that talks about an action item? We don't have any action items tonight.
No, you don't.
I don't need to read that?
You don't need to read anything that doesn't apply.
Okay. Okay. So last week, or last meeting, we talked about partial cross-section streets, and I did receive an email from Josh Polson. He actually came to the meeting last time. And should I read his comment? Okay. He says, thanks for your service on planning and zoning. I was thinking tonight during the meeting, perhaps there's another compromise approach to the road width issue. Most of the added costs to the developer come during the park strip, curb and gutter, and sidewalk if required. Merely requiring them to lay 13 more feet of asphalt to make the road more usable for the future and safer is minimal. I think it's unfair that the first developer bear all the costs of a fully finished road, which means finishing it on two sides. Putting adequate pavement down and sufficient water sewer just makes good sense. Those costs will be borne by future lot owners anyway, not the developer. So it's a good option. And the question was asked last time about partial roads and what other cities might be doing. So I wondered if anyone from staff had a comment on what other cities might be doing. The mayor.
I don't have a comment other than I think it'd be worthwhile if you heard from our city engineer
Okay.
and request he weigh in when you have this discussion.
Okay. So our city engineer's not here.
And obviously he's not here.
Last I talked to him, which was about 3 hours ago, I honestly thought he was coming. Rob, did he say anything to you?
No, I thought he was coming too. I thought he was just being fastly late, thinking that it would be 6:08 before he was requested.
Kathleen, I sent him a note, asked him if he would be here just so he could weigh in.
Okay, that's great. We'll take all the information we can get. So do you want to call him and see if he's coming?
I sent him a text.
Okay, so we would like to hear from the city engineer. Rob, do you have anything you want to say?
It's a big topic. There's a lot of different sides to it.
We have a microphone.
When it comes to road cross sections, it's a very loaded topic. There's so many different avenues and different situations depending on where we're talking about. The cross section width, whether it's an 80 or 99, a 60 or 50 foot right of way. We've got all these different potentials, and when it comes to our master plan, where that road's really going to go. And there's a lot of differences between the east side of our town and the west side of our town, because we try to utilize the grid system, which works really well for sharing the cost with the developer that own each side of that property line. You get up on those topographical problem areas, like our benches, yeah, it starts to meander and do what works for the terrain. So there's a lot of different avenues, and the biggest thing right now that I keep circling back around is when it comes to legalities. So you've got some legalities that you got to consider when it comes to making sure that you don't impose maybe too much on a developer, and if you do, are we willing to, as a city, pay that extra costs because you might be imposing too much. So there's some legal stuff involved as well.
I have a question for you. As we looked at this is Ruth Ann Holloway. As we looked at the partial road situation, one of the things that occurred to me in driving around the city and just trying, and other places just to kind of get an idea, would be if you only have a partial road and then the one side of the shoulder is not just a drop off as we talked last time, it is finished, it's smoothed out level with the finished road. My question would be, if that side is not finished, then it would probably be the city that would have to maintain that section. and the runoff on the water could cause a lot of erosion into the part that's not finished. And what have you seen on that with the runoff with no catch dams and that type of thing? Put on one side that's finished with curb and gutter, but the other side is just left smoothed out. But then what happens in the winter and heavy rainstorms and things like that when we have water that could go over the road?
So currently our partial street cross section does not have a crown in the road. It all tapers to the one side with curb. Now, if we were to change the cross section to where we're trying to add more asphalt, whether it be 30 feet of oil or half of a 56-foot asphalt pad or something rather, and we end up with a crown and not curb on that side, then yes, we're going to need our specs to address the water issue on that side of the road. So whether it's a swell or something, and there's so many different aspects as to where these property lines are in order to make our master plan work as the city wants it to look. So there's lots of different caveats to each situation.
Could it be written in such a way and set up in such a way that the particulars of the subdivision and the road and the traffic on the road and the slope of the road, and as well as easements and egress? What I'm wondering is, could we write language that said that it needed to go through certain kinds of city engineering for each individual case, because they're all different. They're all going to be different.
And it's always good to try to give, the developer some flexibility, but yet get the vision that the city wants.
Mm-hmm.
Ordinances are really hard to write that way, but we do our best to try to.
What I'm saying is we give the city the power through language that says it has to be approved and passed according to that unique situation, that road, whatever it is.
Right.
And then
the road designation comes into play in a lot of that when it comes to whether it's a local road, a residential road, or a collector or arterial road. That changes a lot of what we're talking about depending on that right-of-way width and where that road's able and desired to go. Developers quite often, they share the cost with the future developer next to them. Therefore, the city's not having to contribute to complete that road. But if we shift the road so that one developer is building more than half that road, which is, I don't know if it's, when it's a Utah thing or Cache County has kind of adopted that idea of trying to split the cost and run roads down the grid system on property lines so that developers come in, they both do their proportionate share. So if we have a developer that has to do more than that share, then we might have to help with the costs, or we're going to have to work with the development and how that development gets designed so that they aren't negatively impacted, so that they can get houses on both sides of that street that they're spending all that money for. Different things like that. So that's why topography and current infrastructure comes into play in such a big way.
Well, there are developers that are only developing one side of the street in some areas, probably in the older areas. And then there are developers that are doing like a whole big development. So then they would be responsible for all of it, right?
Correct.
Yeah, my concern would be the roads that are partial. That's the concern I have is having one side not done. Then does the city have impact liability on that? If there's, like, if one part of the road washes out and some unforeseen something happens to someone, does that leave the city liable? And then, of course, the wear and tear on the road that has been made, does it break that down? And then tying our hands behind our back, so to speak, with language that is not flexible enough. It's a tricky one.
It really is. I mean, we haven't had a lot of problems that I can think of when it comes to our current partial cross sections because of at least with water damage and erosion and things like that, simply because it is all flowing to the one side. Now, it does come into different little problems when it comes to the larger collector type roads not having the crown where you really want it. And we have had to spend a little bit of money here and there to readjust and maybe cut a little bit more of the existing road out, the existing partial road out, and correctly do a transition to get that crown so it works for the grade of the flow of water across that road.
This is Michael Fortune. I just had a question. I think the real issue comes into play. We're looking at, do we have a developer put down more asphalt? And if he's doing development of a road, that one side affects him, the other side is someone else's property, doesn't affect him. And what everybody's looked at is what would be ideal is to put more asphalt down, maybe let that first developer incur those costs, which is reasonable. The issue that comes in about the drainage part deals more along the lines of now instead of just having a half road that slopes to the curb and gutter that that developer's putting in, you're going to put a crown in because of the larger asphalt road now. You're going to take advantage of that, which means we're creating runoff on the other side. Because it wouldn't make sense, would it, that you eliminate the crown and have the whole asphalt that is put down slope to the one side?
Right,
Because
so you
right
have
now-
to have that particular first developer would have to bear more cost because they're going to shift that road further onto their own property in order to accomplish the extra asphalt and the swell or whatever is going to, resolve the drainage issues. And so that's where I circle back around to, making sure that we cross the T's, legal aspects or the city's desire to contribute to some of this. We want it to play out in a certain way.
But I think you're right. We're going to create an issue by creating the crown in this street. That one side we've developed, the developers taking care of the curb gutter and the drainage, but the other side we haven't. Where before it's a flat road, there's still some drainage when it's a smaller road and all that to both sides, but you're going to create an increase there. So that's the only issue really as you come to how much does that first developer incur and how you go about that.
All right, I'm not needed no more.
All you have to do is drive down Second South.
I'm going to do that.
Because Second South is, the roads are crumbling on the sides and the crown doesn't go down the middle, the crown goes like this down the road.
The downtown roads were built so long ago, they didn't really even consider crowns
Yeah.
in much degree. They're only 18, 23 feet wide, and they're pretty flat.
Mayor Drew, you had a comment?
Just to take off on where Rob was. Here's a good example. I was trying to think of what street would have been recently built as a partial road. I know none of you folks, well, Ruth Ann, you might. If you go down 10 South and you're going west down the hill towards the church property, go through that four-way. The next street down below that is 300 East. That used to be a pothole dirt road for a long time. And we just finally decided we had to finish it. So the city finished that road. There's curb and gutter and sidewalk on the east side, and it is a partial road. So if you want an example of a partial road that's recently been built to our road profile that's in our code right now, that's probably a good example. It's about 1 block.
How much asphalt is there? How wide is it?
24 feet.
Okay,
So it's built to our current partial road profile.
so if somebody comes in and they need to finish the other side,
So the other side gets developed at west side, then the rest of the asphalt, sidewalk, curb and gutter will be put in by whoever develops the west side. And I think it does slope to like Rob said, to
to the curb.
the east side of the curb, right?
So here's a question, because I know that property, because I've driven on that road several times. Hypothetically, let's say that the land to the west is not developed for quite a while, and then it is put in, but now there's more wear and tear on the one half and not on the other. And now you have one side that's not even with the new side. Hypothetically,
Sounds like a Rob problem, I don't know.
um,
This is where our city engineer probably ought to step in and
okay.
answer your
Thanks, Mayor.
questions.
Okay, Max, you're on.
Okay, to answer that question, there have been cases like that, not necessarily in Providence, but other cities who do partial street cross sections. And at that point, the city has made a decision oftentimes to, I mean, if it's 20, 25 years and that amount of asphalt
Just
has already
upgrade it.
lived its life, you just go ahead and just replace the entire asphalt. So you put the curb and gutter on the west side, in this case that we're talking about, the curb and gutter and sidewalk and stuff would go on the west side. And when that developer, brings their contractor in to repave his portion, the city would probably just chip in the money and repave the entire street so that the entire thing gets repaved. And at that point, if you did want to adjust the crown to the center or wherever you may want it, you could obviously do that. But maybe the city didn't have the money, and at that point you would just go ahead and, yes, the old asphalt on one side of the street and new asphalt on the other.
So it would be the city's responsibility to upgrade the old asphalt.
Yeah, typically it would be, yeah.
Do we have any, this is Ruth Ann again, do we have any situations in the city that we're aware of where one side would be more city and the other side ends up being more on a private, where it's split? Do we have anything like that?
You're saying the road would be built on private?
I
Part of the road would be
know
built on private?
that this happened to my sister-in-law in Meridian, Idaho. Half the road, it's one wide road, it's big, they take tractors and stuff down it, but one half is city and the other half belongs to private, to the individuals who have the lots along the one side.
Now that happens in certain cases where roads were built before, old roads. In Cache County, there's a number of places that happens where the road has never been dedicated and yet it was built, it was paved, and so it's across private property. That actually happens quite a bit in old situations, but not typically. Nowadays that doesn't happen too much because generally speaking, if the city or if the city's going to build a road or the county's going to build a road, they would usually require that be dedicated. But yeah, there are a lot of cases like that that are remnants from days long ago. So
Some of the questions that we had for you was what does a city like Logan do? What do some of the cities around Cache Valley do about the partial roads? Do they allow it? Do they require that they do a whole road?
Well, it varies, and everything's nuanced, but most of the cities do have some type of a partial street cross section. Whether it's not necessarily just like Providence's, but it's a similar idea. Yeah.
Okay. Issues, problems?
This is Rowan. I think Roseanne's problem is she's looking at the partial street cross section here. She's saying a crown right in the middle of it. Right, Roseanne?
Well,
And so you're seeing a bare spot on the one side that could be chipped off.
well, and erosion could occur.
Right, but that's the one where you're at getting your questions from this cross section.
Some of it. Now, this is Ruth Ann. Laura Bandit sent an email that was sent to us, and she had a suggestion. And in that suggestion, she said, what if on a partial type situation where the one side is the property is not being developed yet, but the other side is being developed? She said, what if we have them put the asphalt down on both sides, but the side that is non-developed just wouldn't have curb and gutter? I think that's what she said.
And that's basically what Josh said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, plus, when they're doing the development, if trucks are gonna go in and out of it, you don't want the curb and gutter down anyway. Because you don't know exactly what the layout on the land for that subdivision might be, where the driveways would be, etc. So to have that unfinished might be a good way
Advantageous.
to that. And then if there is damage on that side, when the new development goes in, then the developer then would be responsible to maybe cut the edge of that road, make it smooth, put the curb and gutters in along that side where the development's getting finished.
You're still making that first developer pay for all the blacktop. That's the only problem with that.
This is Michael, but I think that was what I think there was a general consensus that was probably
the best way of doing it. The real cost is in the curb gutter and so forth, sidewalks and those things. The asphalt is not as critical. The real question came was, if we require the developer to put the asphalt down, are we going to have a crown in the middle, and now the one side that doesn't have the curb and gutter, have we created a drainage issue for that? Or do we have the 24 foot of asphalt, the width, and it sloped to one side, to the side that has the curb and gutter? I think that's the thing. We don't want to do something that creates a legal issue for us,
Right,
the
yeah.
city. So, but I think the additional asphalt for the first developer coming through, it improves it, it gets the road ready, all that kind of stuff like that. And then as the other property is developed, or it's never developed, or whatever, if at that time, then that's the bulk of the cost. I went and looked at that a lot more and checked with some people, and it really is the curb, gutter, sidewalk, all that concrete work and drainage and all that. It's a great deal of the cost. So, but the asphalt would be a good idea and would benefit the city and that particular neighborhood.
Madam Chair, I also think if we did the full road of asphalt, it benefits, especially if it's a subdivision, it benefits the neighborhood. Because then they're not dirt over on this side. They're not going to have people driving over that edge to turn around or back up or park or different things. I think it makes it nicer for the residents that are living there. And then that brings up the value of the real estate when people want to look at lot plats that might be being drawn for the other side. Just an idea. Just a thought.
Mrs. Rowan, what could be done is that we do the full road, require the full road, but when the site is not developed, is then being developed, the new developer then reimburse the original developer for the extra blacktop he had to put down.
This is Kathleen. What kind of extra cost are we talking about? Sometimes when you're laying stuff down, the cost is cheaper when you've got a bunch coming,
Yeah, and it does depend a little bit on the width of the pavement. So in other words, if the asphalt that's going down is a convenient width to use a laydown machine to lay it down, then in other words, I've had contractors tell me that they can put down 10 feet of asphalt, 10-foot wide strip of asphalt, about as cheap as they can do a 3 or 4 foot strip, just because the 3 or 4 foot strip, they don't do with a laydown machine very well, and it's kind of a patch, so to speak, rather than an actual, full width pave of the asphalt. So, yeah, that's something to consider. The other thing that you might consider is that the more asphalt you require the first developer to put down, that will impact how much right-of-way he's actually giving up too, likely. Because he's got to be able to put that asphalt down on a right-of-way rather than putting it, like you said earlier, over on the adjacent property that may be private. So it's if you're requiring him to do additional asphalt, he may be required to do additional right-of-way as well, which has a cost to it.
which would reduce the size of a lot, so,
Right.
potentially.
Madam Chair. On Rowan's idea. If the majority of the cost is in curb, gutter, and sidewalk that the next developer would have to pay for, he can't just butt up to that if it's been there for a while. He's going to have someone come in and cut that asphalt and clean up the edge before the curb and gutter could be laid. So he is going to he'll have a good expense put into that, just cleaning that up and then putting the curb and gutter and the sidewalk in. And I don't know, we've been looking at some private road, different things and having quotes done. And you're right about the width. Sometimes it's the cost to put down a wider and extended is not that much more. It is an expense, yes, but it's not prohibitively more. But what we're looking at is how does it impact the neighborhood? How does it affect the neighborhood? The liability to the city, the aesthetics to the city, the edge wear on the side that's not finished, and how to solve that.
Well, there's one more issue. This is Kathleen. The issue is property ownership
Right.
and right of way. So he or she might put as much as they can because they don't own any more of it.
Right.
So how can we require them to put down more asphalt? Otherwise, they have to reduce the size of their lots.
Right.
Maybe that's not a bad thing. I don't know.
This is Michael. Wouldn't you say the majority of the roads that are existing, that there is a right-of-way already established? And so there's probably not very many that the landowners own to the center of the roadway or whatever, where property lines used to be that way, or like it is in the county so much. So there is a right-of-way already there. It's just, are we going from a 14-foot wide road now to a 24-foot wide asphalt road, something like that? And that's where, you're saying you're taking some more, but we typically would have probably either a 30 or 30-foot right-of-way. Now we're going to a 40 or something like that overall in the new development. The development on the one side. Are we changing is that typical that the right-of-way width for that road would change with the developer giving a greater portion because the width of the road is changing?
Yeah, usually this issue comes up in an area where there is no existing road. So in other words, it's between two landowners that, they may just be paved roads.
Yeah.
And so that's oftentimes where this issue comes up. So there's no existing right of way at all.
Okay.
You do have the situation you're talking about as well, where possibly they're developing along an existing right of way where they have to give up a little additional land. But frequently it comes up in the other situation where it's between two landowners that are just undeveloped land and there is no existing right of way at all.
Max, did you develop the cross-section design?
Did you say, have I developed it or
Did
did I?
you, or did you participate in it?
Yeah.
Madam Chair. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just thought of something that if there's one side being developed and one side that's not being developed, you could have them both, if they're both zoned the same, then the party that is, let's say A is that's being developed and B is not. If I was B and I had plans in the future to develop my property, and if they're willing to put that down, then the cost for me to come back in later and prepare that other half of that road when it would already be finished, I would think would be an advantage to property owner B. I could see where maybe that wouldn't work, where you've got residential on one side and maybe the other side is more like a commercial type situation. And then that would be a little different. But I still go back to, if maybe we need to do a Ben Franklin where you write down and you rate it. On this side, this is to the advantage, and we give it 1 to 10. And this side, no, this would not work. And we rate it and maybe just look at it and kind of say, well, okay, in these scenarios, how would it rate out? And look at that, because I really don't want to be so loose-ended that there's no ordinances put where it could just be taken advantage of and not done properly. On the other hand, I don't want it so tight that people have there's no flexibility for the city. So if we could come up with language that would help with that flexibility, with maybe certain circumstances require that they have to have that situation discussed and then approved. I don't know.
Says Kathleen, I think in a perfect world, that would be great, but it's not. And people don't speak to one another, and developer A might be really unhappy that
Developer B is doing any. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
or developer B is unhappy because they want to keep their farmland and
Yeah.
they don't want people driving past. So I think that happens a lot. How big is the problem?
Before you go on,
Okay.
if you look at the cross-section that's drawn, you have a full, the partial street cross-section is a full street, the way it's drawn. This F on the side is for curb and gutter. So, I think what is done here is what, Josh is talking about. It's already drawn.
It's different.
Yeah,
But there are different widths of roads depending on where they are, right?
Right, well, see, B is the minimum of 24 feet. As the road is to be wider, that B will get more footage to it. See, this says B is 24 foot minimum. That means, let's say this is a 66 foot wide road. Well, B would be,
37.
37.
37.
yeah, see?
So the F on there is actually meant to be a shoulder to try to protect the edge of the asphalt so that in this scenario where you're building asphalt with no curb up against it, the idea is that you have at least a 2-foot shoulder there, sometimes a 4-foot shoulder there to try to protect and give some integrity to that shoulder of the asphalt.
Right.
So that it doesn't just deteriorate.
But it does show a swell in the middle, even on the unfinished, a swell down the middle on the Parcel Street
A crown.
cross-section.
A
Crown, yeah.
And it does say that that is to be approved by the city, because there are situations where, maybe it doesn't matter that that be in the center of the 24 feet of asphalt and we crown it and let water run both directions. That's sometimes not an issue, other times it is.
Maybe there's an irrigation ditch
Right, exactly.
on the other side.
That's correct. And so if it's not gonna hurt anything, then you can crown it. If it's, we're worried about the drainage causing problems, then you go ahead and shed it all back towards the curb and gutter. So that's why that note is on there, that it needs to be approved by the city.
I think what's been done here is well done.
I guess my question to you, Max, is what do you see the issues are? And from a city engineer, what is your recommendation?
Well, I think this detail, we've used it now for a number of years. It's gone in multiple cases and it's worked really quite well. There is no silver bullet that works every time, for sure. But this is, I feel like we've had pretty good success with this type of street cross section. So I'm not so sure that I see much that needs to be changed on it.
So the ordinance doesn't need to be changed in your,
You mean this detail, yeah,
well, what we're currently doing
right.
doesn't need change. I read through the detail and it seems pretty comprehensive.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's some wiggle room in there for some of the situations that we would come up against.
Right. And as Mayor Drew pointed out, there is a good example. The street on 300 East that he talks about is a pretty good example to go take a look at, drive down and see what it looks like on the ground. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, does this have to go to public hearing?
That's a question for Scarlett.
No, this is in our standards and specifications, unless you, change the, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the idea is to get rid of the partial street. If the idea was to get rid of the partial street altogether, then we would have to do a change in the ordinance because, Title 11, Chapter 4, I can't remember where it is in there, but I know it's in here because that's why I put it on here, or gave you the information. Oh, it's G. Title 11, Chapter 4, Section 3G says partial streets. It says when a partial street is approved, it will require sufficient right-of-way to construct improvements as shown on the partial street cross-section. So you don't have to change an ordinance. It would just be a matter of changing the standard in the standards and specs, so it would not require a public hearing. The city council can do that with resolution.
Okay.
Unless you're getting rid of partial street altogether, then you would require a public hearing.
Okay. Doesn't sound like we need to really do any changes to it,
I think.
because there's enough wiggle room in there for
Well done.
the city to assess what's going on and what needs to be done.
Kathleen?
Yes.
This is Michael. I was just going to say thank you very much for the explanations. That helped me understand it a lot better. And I think the only issue I really had before was about the drainage. And because of your clarification that the city can decide what would work better. Do we have a crown in the middle? Do we have it more on one side? I think that addresses that situation. So I think that cleared it up a great deal. So I think what's done is done very well, and addresses it and gives the flexibility, depending on what the situation is on the ground, how best to handle it. And so I don't think we need to change anything,
Okay.
as long as it has those things.
So if there's no more discussion, I think we can say that we've opted not to make any changes on it. Leave it as is. So it doesn't need to go anywhere, right?
Your recommendation can go back to the city council and they can
We
decide
make-
if they want to do something different.
Do we make a motion to go to the city council?
Because it got suggested from council to have you look at, it's probably best that you make a recommendation one way or the other back to them.
Right.
So we need a motion. We need somebody to move to send it back to the council saying we've studied it and we
Whatever
see
your
that.
recommendation is.
Okay. So,
I would make a motion that we accept it as it exists, and that we refer it back to the city council with our recommendations that it be accepted as is.
okay, so the motion was made by,
I second it.
okay, motion made by Michael, and
Fortune.
Fortune made a motion that we send it back to the city council. Rowan Cecil seconded the motion. Any discussion? Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Okay,
Is that unanimous?
that's unanimous. And the next thing is staff reports.
We haven't had a city council meeting since your last planning commission meeting, so I don't have a city council update. I don't know if Ryan has anything that he would like to add, but
I just appreciate the council looking at it and being able to weigh in, being able to do your research. It is always helpful when a planning and zoning commission will take things on, look at them objectively, even though you may have gotten different feedback and input, and to be able to evaluate and to make those recommendations is helpful. So a good planning and zoning makes a lot of difference with the council and with the administration. So I thank you for your effort. And so anyway, I don't have any specific items to cover. Thank you.
Thank you. Any information from the commission reports? Anybody have anything?
I move we close the meeting.
We have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Roland Cecil, moved to close the meeting, and Ruth Ann Holloway seconded. And I want it to be noted that under my watch, it was a very short meeting.
All in favor?
Oh, all in favor.
All in favor.
That's good.